What if the America Europeans were warned about is not the America they actually found? During the 2026 World Cup summer, beaches from Florida to California began filling with European tourists who came for soccer and stayed for something far harder to explain. Why are they choosing American sand over famous Mediterranean coastlines? And why are locals suddenly seeing their own beaches through foreign eyes? The answer says more about America than any headline ever could. Miami Beach. There's something wonderfully ironic about flying to America expecting traffic, tension, and all the gloomy headlines you have been fed back home, only to end up barefoot on Miami Beach, wondering why nobody mentioned this part. During the 2026 World Cup summer, South Florida becomes much more than a stop between matches. For many European visitors, the beach itself starts stealing attention from the tournament, because the America in front of them looks suspiciously different from the America they were prepared to judge. Miami Beach is a perfect place for that misunderstanding to fall apart. European travelers already know spectacular coastlines. Spain has the Costa del Sol, Portugal has the Algarve, France has the Côte d'Azur, and Italy has enough beautiful seaside towns to make a postcard company financially nervous. So Americans do not need to pretend Europe somehow forgot how beaches work. The surprise is in the style of the experience. In parts of Italy, especially along heavily developed stretches of the Adriatic and Tyrrhenian coasts, rows of stabilimenti balneari organize the shoreline into umbrellas, loungers, and paid beach facilities. On the French Riviera, summer beach clubs can make a few hours beside the Mediterranean feel more like reserving a table than simply wandering toward the water. Miami Beach has businesses and rentals too, of course, but the wider American beach culture can feel strikingly casual. You can walk onto long stretches of public sand, throw down a towel, bring your own cooler, watch a volleyball games, hear 3 languages before lunch, and somehow become part of the scene without receiving an instruction manual. That looseness matters more than it sounds. The beach is broad enough in places that the distance from the street to the Atlantic can feel like crossing a small neighborhood made entirely of sand. Behind it sit palms, colorful lifeguard towers, and the famous Art Deco architecture of Miami Beach, while ahead is warm blue water stretching toward the horizon. The whole place has the visual confidence of a movie set, except somebody forgot to yell cut, so families are still opening sandwiches and tourists are trying to keep sunscreen out of their eyes. This is where the media image becomes almost funny. European coverage of the United States often focuses, understandably, on American politics, crime, healthcare debates, gun violence, or social division. Those subjects are real and deserve serious discussion, yet they are also a terrible substitute for experiencing an ordinary American afternoon. Countries are bigger than their worst headlines, and Miami Beach makes that obvious before the ice in your drink has finished melting. There's another difference European visitors may notice. Americans are remarkably comfortable turning public recreation into a full-day operation. Coolers appear, folding chairs multiply. Somebody has brought enough snacks to survive a minor hurricane. A beach umbrella becomes headquarters, and suddenly one afternoon looks like a family tailgate with an ocean attached. That is deeply American in the best possible way. Leisure does not have to be precious to be memorable, and perhaps that helps explain why international visitors linger. They may have arrived because football brought them to South Florida, but Miami gives them something television rarely communicates accurately. Ordinary America can be relaxed, welcoming, colorful, and absurdly easy to enjoy. You come expecting a match schedule, then the Atlantic starts rearranging your plans. By sunset, going home can suddenly feel like the least exciting item on the itinerary. Waikiki Beach. Waikiki has a strange way of making Europe feel farther away than the flight time suggests. The real hook is not simply the warm Pacific or the postcard scenery. It is the fact that this beach operates like a public living room, and that can feel surprisingly different to visitors used to a more structured coastal routine. Hawaii receives millions of visitors in a normal year, and Honolulu consistently ranks among the most heavily visited U.S. leisure destinations. Waikiki concentrates that demand into a relatively compact urban shoreline, which helps explain why the sand can feel almost permanently international. During the 2026 World Cup summer, European travelers already moving through the United States have another reason to add Hawaii to the trip, and once they arrive, many discover something American that rarely makes it into overseas political coverage. Public leisure here is unusually easy to join. That point matters more than the scenery. Take beaches around Cannes or Nice in France. They are beautiful, polished, and culturally iconic, yet sections of the waterfront are shaped by private beach clubs, reserved loungers, and organized service. In Waikiki, the mood is much more democratic. A hotel guest can walk out with an expensive surf lesson, while somebody else can show up with a towel from a convenience store and occupy the same ocean. The Pacific does not check your reservation. That simple accessibility creates a social atmosphere that can become addictive. Nobody has to understand a local ritual before participating. Families float in shallow water, beginners wobble onto surfboards, retirees walk the shoreline. Young travelers sit under palms and serious surfers pass through the same visual frame. It feels less like entering a resort and more like temporarily joining a neighborhood whose main street happens to be made of saltwater. The American difference becomes even clearer when you look at surfing. In much of Europe, surfing culture is strongly associated with specific regions such as Portugal's Ericeira, France's Hossegor, or Spain's Basque Coast. In Hawaii, surfing is woven into the cultural identity of the islands themselves. Waikiki helped spread modern surfing to international visitors in the early 20th century, especially through figures such as Duke Kahanamoku. That history gives the beach a character deeper than nice place to swim, and this is where the attraction starts making sense. Visitors may arrive expecting Hawaii to feel remote, exotic, and perhaps slightly difficult to navigate. Instead, Waikiki combines a globally famous beach with buses, restaurants, shops, convenience stores, and hotels within walking distance. It is tropical America without requiring expedition-level planning. You can be waist-deep in warm Pacific water, and 20 minutes later be eating dinner in an air-conditioned restaurant with a refillable drink the size of a small flower vase. That mixture is very American. Big nature, easy access, and almost suspicious levels of convenience. For European visitors accustomed to choosing between beautiful scenery and urban practicality, Waikiki quietly asks why they should have to choose at all. Perhaps that is why the place gets under people's skin. It does not demand admiration. It simply makes everyday pleasure absurdly easy. And once a beach starts feeling less like a destination and more like somewhere you could actually live, the return ticket begins to look a little less persuasive. Myrtle Beach. Some beaches ask you to lie quietly under an umbrella and admire the horizon. Myrtle Beach seems to look at that idea, hand you a funnel cake, point toward a Ferris wheel, and politely suggest that relaxing could use a little more horsepower. That is exactly why this stretch of South Carolina can become so memorable for European visitors traveling around the United States during the 2026 World Cup summer. The surprise here is not simply the Atlantic Ocean. Europe has magnificent Atlantic beaches of its own, from Portugal to western France. Myrtle Beach introduces something far more culturally specific. The American belief that a beach vacation should keep entertaining you long after you have shaken the sand out of your shoes. The wider Grand Strand runs for roughly 60 miles along the South Carolina coast. That scale creates room for an entire tourism culture to grow beside the water rather than merely around it. Mini golf courses, seafood restaurants, amusement rides, arcades, live entertainment, and family attractions sit close enough together that a beach day can quietly turn into a 12-hour outing without anybody holding a meeting about it. Europe certainly understands seaside entertainment. Britain practically wrote an early chapter of the book. Blackpool has its famous pleasure beach, piers, and illuminations, while Brighton combines its beach with a landmark pier packed with amusement machines and rides. Yet the American version feels different because of the amount of space involved. Myrtle Beach takes the old seaside resort idea and stretches it across miles of low-rise commercial strips, neighborhoods, and coastline, almost as though someone took a British promenade and gave it a South Carolina driver's license. That difference changes how people use the beach. In many European resort towns, the seafront itself remains the main event, with cafes, hotels, and entertainment arranged along a relatively concentrated promenade. Myrtle Beach works more like an ecosystem. Visitors can spend the morning swimming, leave for barbecue or seafood, play 18 holes of miniature golf beside a fiberglass volcano, wander through shops, and somehow end the evening looking down from the skywheel at the same ocean they were standing in hours earlier. It sounds excessive until you realize how practical it feels once you are there. American vacation culture has always had a soft spot for giving families options. Children get bored, weather changes, somebody gets hungry every 47 minutes, and grandparents do not necessarily want to spend 6 straight hours baking beside the Atlantic. Myrtle Beach answers those ordinary problems with almost comical abundance. If the ocean needs a commercial break, there are dozens of ways to fill it. That is where one stereotype about America begins to work in America's favor. Europeans often hear that Americans make everything bigger, louder, and more commercial. Myrtle Beach cheerfully pleads guilty, then demonstrates why millions of vacationers enjoy the result. The commercial side is not hiding the beach. Much of it exists because generations of families wanted more ways to spend time together around the beach. There is something wonderfully unpretentious about that. Nobody expects you to perform sophistication here. You can eat fried seafood in shorts, lose badly at mini golf, buy a souvenir you absolutely do not need, and watch the Atlantic turn orange in the evening. The day does not have to become tasteful enough for Instagram before it is allowed to be good. For Europeans whose image of the United States has often been filtered through political arguments and alarming news clips, that ordinary happiness can be unexpectedly persuasive. Myrtle Beach is not trying to settle a debate about America. It is simply showing what Americans are remarkably good at building, places where families can fill an entire day without running out of things to do. A European visitor may come for the ocean, but the dangerous part is everything waiting behind the sand. Because once your beach day includes barbecue, mini golf, and a Ferris wheel, going back to a towel and a paperback suddenly feels suspiciously under-equipped. Virginia Beach. The funniest thing about Virginia Beach is that it refuses to behave like a beach you simply visit. It feels closer to a full-sized American city that happened to pull a chair up beside the Atlantic and decide the ocean should be part of everyday life. That difference becomes fascinating when European visitors arrive with a more compact idea of what a seaside destination usually looks like. In places such as San Sebastian in Spain, Scheveningen in the Netherlands, or Brighton in England, the beach is deeply connected to the city, but the relationship is often compressed into a relatively tight waterfront zone. Virginia Beach stretches that idea until it feels unmistakably American. The city has roughly 35 miles of shoreline, and its famous oceanfront boardwalk runs for about 3 miles. That means the beach is not some delicate ribbon squeezed between buildings and water. It becomes an entire stage for daily life. And that scale changes human behavior in ways statistics cannot fully explain. People do not merely come here to see the sea. They exercise beside it, cycle beside it, eat beside it, take children out beside it, and return again the next morning as if the Atlantic were simply another neighborhood amenity. The boardwalk itself is wide enough to separate pedestrians from bikes and wheeled traffic, which sounds like a boring planning detail until you watch how much freedom it creates. Nobody is constantly negotiating space with a stroller, a runner, and a bicycle, all trying to occupy the same 6 feet of pavement. For visitors from older European coastal cities, this can feel almost luxurious without being luxurious in the expensive sense. Space itself is the luxury. That is where America quietly wins people over. Much of Europe grew around centuries-old street plans, fortified centers, historic promenades, and coastlines where every meter already has a job. Those places are beautiful precisely because of that density. America had room to build differently, and Virginia Beach shows what happens when that room becomes part of the leisure culture. The horizon stays open, families spread out naturally, and a simple walk can continue for miles without feeling like you're being funneled through a tourist corridor. There's something almost comically American about it. Americans will look at 3 miles of boardwalk and apparently decide that this is a reasonable amount of boardwalk. Yet the excess is useful rather than theatrical. It gives people breathing room, and that matters during busy summer periods when international visitors add themselves to domestic crowds. A heavily visited beach can still feel surprisingly manageable when the place was built to absorb people instead of merely tolerate them. For Europeans following the 2026 World Cup across the United States, that can become one of those small cultural corrections that stays with them. The television version of America often concentrates on conflict because conflict makes better television. Virginia Beach presents something much less dramatic, and therefore much easier to overlook. Public life can be spacious, organized, and wonderfully ordinary. That ordinariness may be the addictive part. Nobody needs a reservation to walk beside the Atlantic. Nobody has to dress correctly for the occasion. You can arrive sweaty from a bike ride, carrying coffee in a paper cup, and still get the same ocean as everyone else. The experience feels casual enough to repeat every day, which is exactly why some visitors stop treating it like sightseeing. At some point, the beach is no longer an attraction on the itinerary. It starts looking suspiciously like a lifestyle. Clearwater Beach? There's a particular facial expression people make when they step into seawater expecting punishment and get bathwater instead. Clearwater Beach specializes in producing it. The Gulf of Mexico can reach around the mid-80s Fahrenheit in summer, roughly 29 to 30 degrees Celsius, which means the first few steps into the water do not require the little shoulder-shrugging survival dance familiar to anyone who has tried swimming off Northern Europe. That temperature is the entire story here, because warm water changes what a beach actually means. Take Brighton in England, where summer sea temperatures commonly remain around the upper 50s to mid-60s Fahrenheit. Along Germany's North Sea coast, conditions can be similarly brisk outside the warmest part of the season. Those beaches have their own beauty, traditions, and loyal crowds, but swimming often comes with a moment of negotiation between the human nervous system and the Atlantic. You walk in confidently, the water reaches your knees, and suddenly every decision you have ever made deserves reconsideration. Clearwater removes that negotiation. Once the Gulf feels comfortable enough to stay in, the ocean stops being scenery and starts becoming the main room of the vacation. People linger, children stay in longer. Adults who originally planned a polite 15-minute dip find themselves floating around an hour later, looking suspiciously committed to the lifestyle. A European visitor who normally treats swimming as the brave part of a beach day can suddenly understand why Americans carry drinks, chairs, and enough sunscreen to qualify as a small retail operation. Nobody is planning to leave soon. That helps explain why Florida's beach culture can feel so different from the seaside rhythm of Northern Europe. The key is not that Americans somehow invented relaxing beside water. Europe has been exceptionally good at that for centuries. The American advantage here is environmental. When air, sand, and sea cooperate at the same time, an ordinary beach afternoon expands naturally into most of the day. Clearwater's pale sand makes the contrast even more noticeable, but the addictive ingredient remains the Gulf itself. According to long-term coastal temperature records, Gulf waters around Florida commonly climb above 80 degrees Fahrenheit for extended periods during the warmer months. For somebody accustomed to the English Channel or North Sea, that difference of 20 degrees can feel less like changing beaches and more like changing the rules. And Americans build their habits around those rules. You see families treating the shoreline almost like a backyard swimming pool with a horizon attached. Nobody makes a ceremonial entrance into the sea. People wander in, wander out, return after lunch, then go back again before sunset. The water becomes part of the day instead of a challenge inserted into it. That simplicity may be why Clearwater becomes dangerous to a return ticket. European travelers arriving in America during the 2026 World Cup may expect their strongest memories to come from stadiums, cities, or famous landmarks. Then Florida hands them an 85-degree Gulf and quietly ruins cold water swimming for the foreseeable future. The media back home can argue about America all evening. Meanwhile, somebody from Northern Europe is still waist-deep in Clearwater at sunset, discovering that the most persuasive American argument of the day requires absolutely no speech at all. Cannon Beach. Cannon Beach does something almost rude to the European idea of an American beach. There are no pastel lifeguard towers, no tropical palms, no neon promenade, and no warm water promise waiting at the edge of the sand. Instead, Oregon gives visitors wind, sea mist, dark rock, cold Pacific water, and haystack rock rising roughly 235 feet above the shoreline, like nature decided to park a small skyscraper in the surf. That is exactly why this place becomes unforgettable. The interesting comparison is not with Spain or Greece, because Cannon Beach is not trying to compete with Mediterranean sunshine. A better match is Europe's dramatic Atlantic edge, Etretat in Normandy, the cliffs of Moher in Ireland, or the volcanic coastlines of Iceland. Those places attract people because the coast feels powerful rather than comfortable. Cannon Beach belongs to the same emotional family, but the American version comes with a distinctly different sense of scale and access. Haystack rock is the key. At about 72 meters tall, it is large enough to dominate almost every photograph without needing help from a telephoto lens. When the tide falls, people can walk close to its base where tide pools reveal starfish, anemones, crabs, and other marine life. That means the landmark is not sitting politely in the distance like a museum piece. It becomes something people move toward, circle around, inspect, and remember through wet shoes. That hands-on relationship with nature is one of the reasons American coastal travel can surprise European visitors. In Europe, some of the most iconic seaside landscapes are protected by steep cliffs, narrow paths, or carefully controlled viewpoints. Cannon Beach is protected too, but the experience still feels unusually direct. The scenery is enormous, yet people can physically enter it without turning the visit into a mountaineering project. Oregon also offers a piece of public access culture that matters here. Under state law, the public has broad access rights along Oregon's ocean beaches. The famous 1967 Beach Bill reinforced public use of the state's coastline, helping preserve the idea that the sandy shore should remain open rather than become a patchwork of private waterfront territory. For visitors from parts of Europe where coastal access can vary sharply depending on geography, private property, or resort development, that legal tradition can feel almost radical in its simplicity. You find the beach, you walk onto the beach, and the view does not come with velvet ropes. That may be the real American luxury at Cannon Beach. It is not luxury in the sense of champagne service or rented cabanas. It is the luxury of being trusted with something spectacular. Families walk dogs across a shoreline framed by giant sea stacks. Children crouch over tide pools. Couples arrive wrapped in jackets instead of swimwear. Nobody seems bothered that the Pacific is cold enough to make swimming a character-building exercise. The weather actually helps. Clouds give the landscape drama, mist softens the horizon, and the whole place can look like a movie location that forgot to install the movie stars. Europeans who arrive during the 2026 World Cup expecting America to mean stadiums, highways, and giant cities may discover that some of the country's most persuasive moments are almost silent. That matters because foreign media often compress America into noise. Politics is loud, crime stories are loud, cultural arguments are loud. Cannon Beach introduces another America entirely: protected public land, open coastline, marine ecosystems, and an outdoor culture built around going outside even when the weather refuses to cooperate. That last part may feel surprisingly familiar to anyone from Britain or northern France. The difference is that Oregon has given the bad weather a 235-foot rock for company, and somehow that makes everybody forgive the drizzle. Coronado Beach. Coronado Beach has one feature that sounds almost too ordinary to explain its appeal. You can cross from a major American city and suddenly feel as though somebody turned San Diego's volume knob down. That quick change of pace is the real luxury here, and it exposes an interesting difference between the way many Europeans imagine American cities and the way Americans actually use them. Across Europe, famous urban beaches often live right inside the city's pulse. Barcelona's Barceloneta sits beside one of Spain's busiest tourist centers. Nice places the Mediterranean directly alongside the Promenade des Anglais. Scheveningen connects The Hague to a dense strip of restaurants, attractions, and beach clubs. These are fantastic places precisely because the city follows you almost all the way to the towel. Coronado offers a different bargain. The beach stretches for roughly 1.5 miles along the Pacific, with a remarkably broad band of sand in places. Yet downtown San Diego remains right across the bay. That geographical arrangement creates something Europeans arriving during the 2026 World Cup may not expect from Southern California: proximity without pressure. You can enjoy the energy of a major metropolitan area and then escape it without spending half the day escaping it. Americans might shrug at this because they are used to cities spreading outward. To someone from Paris, Amsterdam, or central Barcelona, however, American urban scale can initially look wildly inefficient. Then a place like Coronado reveals the other side of that equation. When everything is not packed together like groceries in an overfilled Trader Joe's bag, recreation gets room to breathe. The sand itself practically demonstrates the point. Instead of everyone funneling toward a narrow usable strip, people can spread out. A family can establish a small kingdom of chairs, towels, and coolers without immediately negotiating a border treaty with the family next door. Someone can throw a football without accidentally sending it into another person's lunch. Even when the beach becomes busy, its width can soften the feeling of crowding. That changes the psychology of leisure. Research on public space repeatedly links access to outdoor environments with recreation and well-being, but Americans hardly need a scientific paper to explain why elbow room feels good. It is the same instinct behind suburban yards, national parks, wide porches, and the deeply American belief that a cup holder should never be more than an arm's length away. Space is not merely empty land here. Americans constantly turn it into something usable. Coronado turns it into permission to slow down. That may sound insignificant until you consider what many European visitors have been hearing about the United States before arriving. Overseas coverage naturally gravitates toward Washington politics, social conflict, and dramatic events because a peaceful Tuesday afternoon beside the Pacific is unlikely to lead the evening news. The result can be a strangely incomplete picture of American life. Then San Diego hands you this: a clean horizon, an enormous public beach, families scattered across the sand in one of America's largest cities, sitting just across the water without dominating the experience. There is no argument being made, which may be exactly why the impression becomes so persuasive. The comparison with Europe is not about deciding which coastline wins. Barceloneta offers an urban energy Coronado does not attempt to copy, while Nice has a density and elegance rooted in a completely different history. What surprises visitors is realizing how many versions of coastal life America can offer within one country. During a World Cup trip, that variety becomes dangerous to the original itinerary. A traveler may have budgeted 2 days for San Diego, then discovers that California has somehow made doing absolutely nothing feel like an activity worth extending. Coronado does not overwhelm people by giving them more things to do. It wins them over by giving them more room to do less. And in a country foreigners are constantly told is always rushing, perhaps finding this much space to slow down is the most unexpected American surprise of all. Maybe that is the real surprise behind these crowded American beaches. European visitors are not just chasing sunshine. They are discovering a version of America that headlines rarely show. Open space, public access, warm water, easygoing families, and entire coastlines built around enjoying ordinary life together can be deeply persuasive. If one American beach changed your opinion of the country, tell us which one below. And if you enjoy seeing America through fresh eyes, subscribe for more stories like this.